Imagine for a second that you are 18 years old and you're lying in this completely sterile hospital bed.
Oh, wow. Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, but it's a terrifying scene because 70% of your body is just covered in third-degree burns. It is this unimaginable trauma. But the truly crazy part is the worst part of your day hasn't even happened yet.
Right, because of the daily treatments.
Exactly. You know that soon the nurses are going to walk in to perform this daily ritual, which is removing your bandages. And their protocol, like the established medical wisdom at the time, is to rip those bandages off as quickly as possible. You know, the whole pull it off like a Band-Aid approach.
Right. The idea being that a short, sharp burst of agonizing pain is psychologically better for you than, dragging the whole miserable process out over an hour.
Yes, they firmly believe that. But this young man who is experiencing this profound daily agony, he intuitively felt that the medical professionals had it completely backward. He really believed that drawing the process out, like starting from the feet, moving really slowly up the body, maybe taking a few breaks, would actually lessen the overall psychological trauma, even if it meant the pain technically lasted much longer.
Which makes sense from a patient's perspective, right?
Yeah.
You want some control, some breathing room.
Exactly. And he literally begged them to slow down. I mean, pleaded with them. But the nurses, operating under the absolute certainty of their medical training, they just insisted that pulling them off quickly was the correct way to minimize his suffering.
And that young man, of course, was Dan Ariely.
Yes, it was. And that visceral, agonizing experience in the burn ward, it didn't just haunt him, it sparked this lifelong, completely obsessive quest to understand human perception and human decision-making under extreme conditions.
Which is such an incredible origin story for a scientist. Because when he finally got out of the hospital, he didn't just try to forget what happened and move on. He actually became a behavioral economist. He started scientifically testing how people process pain.
And he proved those nurses unequivocally wrong, didn't he?
He did. He absolutely proved them wrong. He found that humans tolerate a lower intensity of pain over a longer duration far, far better than a massive spike of intense pain.
Which is just wild to think about. Because it forces us to ask this really deeply unsettling question, right? If highly trained, incredibly compassionate medical professionals could be so systematically wrong about how human beings process a foundational biological experience like pain, then what else are we systematically wrong about?
And that is exactly the core thesis we are exploring with you today on this deep dive. Because classical economics, for instance, is built on this bedrock assumption that we are all perfectly rational, calculating machines.
Right, the whole Homo economicus thing.
Exactly. Homo economicus. The assumption is that you and I, we meticulously weigh every cost, every benefit to maximize our personal utility in every situation. But behavioral economics looks at the actual data and realizes, well, we are nothing like Homo economicus.
Not even close.
No, not at all. Our brains basically evolved for a hunter-gatherer environment, relying on these incredibly fast, intuitive shortcuts. Psychologists call this System 1 thinking. And while those quick shortcuts kept us alive on the savannah like, running from a rustling bush, they misfire wildly in the modern complexities of money or software pricing or even our relationships.
Right, because we all like to think of our brains as these perfect calculators, meticulously weighing all these pros and cons. But really, they're more like easily distracted toddlers in a toy store.
That is a perfect analogy.
So today, we're going to completely dismantle that illusion of perfect rationality. But the point here isn't to make you feel bad about being irrational. I mean, we are all deeply irrational. I am, you are, everybody is.
Oh, absolutely.
The goal here is to illuminate the hidden psychological mechanisms, these unseen cognitive hands that are actively guiding your choices right now. And to do that, I think we have to start at the absolute foundation of how we navigate the world, which is how we actually assign value to things. Because structurally, the human brain is completely incapable of determining absolute value.
That is such a crucial starting point. We completely lack an internal value meter. Like if I hold up a completely new piece of technology or some rare mineral you've never seen, your brain cannot organically calculate its worth. It literally has no biological mechanism to do so.
It just draws a blank.
Completely. We only understand what something is worth by comparing it to something else. Our brains are essentially just contrast engines.
Which brings us perfectly to the decoy effect. Because to understand how easily distracted our brains are, we have to look at this real advertisement for The Economist magazine that Ariely famously studied.
Oh, I love this experiment.
It's so good. So the magazine offered 3 subscription options. Option A was a web-only subscription for $59. Option B was a print-only subscription for $125. And option C was a print and web combo subscription, also for $125.
Now, under classical rational choice theory, an economist would look at that lineup and declare option B mathematically irrelevant.
Right, because who would choose that?
Exactly. Nobody in their right mind would choose a print-only subscription for $125 when they could get print and web for the exact same price. Therefore, the theory dictates that its mere presence shouldn't affect consumer behavior at all. It's just a non-factor.
Right. And when Ariely tested those original 3 options on his MIT students, the results seemed to validate that assumption, at least on the surface, because 84% of the students chose the $125 print and web combo, 16% chose the $59 web-only option, and absolutely 0 people chose that useless option B.
0, which makes sense.
Makes total sense. But here's where the rationality just completely falls apart. Because when Ariely removed that so-called useless option B, and he gave a new group of students just the 2 remaining choices, the $59 web-only or the $125 combo, the preference entirely flipped.
It's amazing.
Suddenly, 68% of the students downgraded to the cheaper $59 option.
Which is terrifying, really. What's terrifying about the decoy effect isn't just that it works on a magazine subscription. It's that our entire perception of our own free will is dismantled by the mere presence of a clearly inferior option.
Wow, yeah.
That middle option wasn't useless at all. It was an asymmetrical dominator, a decoy. See, your brain doesn't actually know how to value a digital magazine versus a physical magazine. That's abstract. But it does know that getting both for the same price as just one is an absolute steal.
So the decoy just gives you a shortcut.
Exactly. The decoy provides a cognitive foothold. It allows the brain to stop agonizing over a complex, abstract valuation and just make a fast, confident, relative comparison.
And once you see this mechanism, you realize it is weaponized against you everywhere. I mean, it's why software companies always have that middle pricing tier that just makes absolutely no sense.
Oh, 100%. The pro tier that exists just to make the enterprise tier look better.
Right. And it's why real estate agents won't show you the target house first. If they want to sell you a moderately overpriced, somewhat dated house, they will first walk you through a deeply ugly, vastly overpriced house.
The ugly house is the decoy.
Yes. By the time you step into the target house, your brain isn't evaluating it objectively against the entire housing market. It's just comparing it to the disaster you saw 10 minutes ago.
It's the architecture of choice. You think you are making an independent decision, but the environment has been structured to make one specific choice feel like a sudden stroke of your own personal genius.
It's wild. But, okay, I understand how we fall for relative comparison when the choices are grouped together like that right in front of us. But I'm honestly struggling with this next concept, which is anchoring.
Anchor.
Yeah, because the research highlights this experiment where students were asked to write down the last 2 digits of their social security number, and then they had to bid on arbitrary items, like a bottle of wine or computer accessories. And the students with higher social security numbers, like the 80s and 90s, they ended up bidding 2 or 3 times as much for the exact same bottle of wine as the students with the lowest numbers.
It's a huge difference.
It is. And I just have to push back on this a little bit, because how can our neural architecture be so fragile that a completely irrelevant random number dictates our financial valuation of a physical object? I mean, it's my social security number.
I know, it sounds completely absurd when you say it out loud.
Yeah.
But it actually reveals how our associative memory functions under the hood. When the brain encounters an entirely novel situation like pricing a totally unfamiliar bottle of wine, it experiences cognitive friction. It doesn't know what to do. So it desperately searches its immediate working memory for any numerical anchor to use as a starting point.
Any number at all.
Any number at all. By forcing the students to write down their social security digits moments before, the researchers artificially planted a number in that immediate working memory.
So the brain just grabs the nearest available data point, even if it's logically unconnected, it just reaches out and grabs it.
Exactly. The brain fires neurons to connect that random number to the wine because it is desperate for a baseline. And once that anchor is set, all subsequent mental adjustments are tethered to it. You might adjust down from a high anchor, sure, but you won't adjust far enough. Wow. And this completely dismantles the classical economic theory of supply and demand. Because supply and demand assumes the consumer enters the market with a pre-existing willingness to pay. Anchoring proved that our willingness to pay is highly malleable, and often it's just a lingering memory of the very first price tag we happen to glance at.
Okay, so that glitch we experience with random numbers is fascinating, but it seems to pale in comparison to what happens when that number drops to zero. Because the research suggests that free isn't just another price point, it's an entirely different psychological dimension.
It really is. Zero is not just another number on a continuum. From a neurobiological perspective, the concept of free acts as an emotional hot button that completely short-circuits our analytical processing.
We see this so clearly in the chocolate experiment. The researchers offered people a choice between a premium Lindt truffle for 15 cents or a standard Hershey's Kiss for 1 cent. Now, that is a rational calculation, right? 15 cents for premium European chocolate is an objective bargain.
That total steal.
And rationally, 73% of people chose the high-quality Lindt. But then the researchers dropped the price of both chocolates by exactly 1 penny. So the Lindt went to 14 cents, and the Hershey's Kiss went to free.
Now, if humans were rational calculators, the behavior shouldn't change at all. The relative distance between the two prices is exactly the same. It's still a 14-cent difference. The value proposition is mathematically identical.
But the behavior inverted completely. Suddenly, 69% of people abandoned the premium truffle and chose the inferior Hershey's Kiss. Just because the cost was zero. It's free is this emotional hot button. We will happily stand in a 2-hour line in the freezing cold to get a free promotional t-shirt or a keychain that we would never willingly pay 10 cents for.
We've all done it. And to understand why, we really have to look at the amygdala and the evolutionary concept of loss aversion. See, human beings are biologically wired to fear loss far more intensely than we enjoy equivalent gains.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Well, in the ancestral environment, losing your food supply meant death. Finding extra food was just a nice bonus. Therefore, every time you make a purchase today, even for a single penny, your brain registers a tiny cognitive risk. It asks, what if this is a bad deal? What if I experience regret?
So even that single penny carries emotional weight.
Precisely. But when something is entirely free, that perceived risk vanishes completely. The fear of regret is just neutralized. So the rational, calculating prefrontal cortex powers down, and the emotional, reward-seeking centers of the brain take complete control.
There is a brilliant real-world validation of this with Amazon. When they rolled out free shipping across Europe, sales just exploded everywhere except in France, and the executives were baffled. They assumed the French market was just structurally different, or maybe they just didn't like buying books online.
Right, they thought it was a cultural thing.
Yeah, but it turned out the French division hadn't made the shipping truly free. They had reduced it to 1 franc, which is functionally equivalent to like a few pennies.
Which is a completely negligible amount of money from an accounting perspective.
But cognitively, it was a massive barrier. Because it wasn't zero, the fear of loss remained. The moment Amazon realized the error and made shipping entirely free in France, sales instantly spiked to match the rest of the world.
It's such a perfect illustration.
It is. And the real-world takeaway here for you, the listener, is profound. Because free eliminates cognitive friction, it blinds us to the hidden costs we are actually paying. Because you are always paying with something.
Always.
When a tech platform is free, you are paying with your attention, your behavioral data, and your privacy. When you buy something you don't even need just to get a buy one, get one free bonus item, you are paying with real dollars just to soothe an evolutionary glitch in your risk assessment.
And that glitch doesn't just distort our math. It happens because free pulls us out of the cold, calculating world of commerce and dumps us right into the warm, complex world of human relationships. It forcibly shifts our internal operating system.
Oh, this is fascinating. It's like your brain runs 2 completely separate operating systems. Let's call them iOS for relationships and Windows for business.
I like that.
Ariely defines these as social norms versus market norms. So social norms govern our friendships, our communities, our favors. It's a totally non-transactional ecosystem. Like, if I help you move a sofa, I don't expect you to hand me a 1099 tax form at the end of the day.
No, I'd probably just offer you a slice of pizza and maybe a beer.
Right, and I'd expect you to return the favor next year when I move. But market norms, on the other hand, are governed by precise costs, wages, and self-interest. It's all about what's fair monetarily.
And catastrophe strikes the absolute moment you try to run a Windows application on that relationship iOS. The systems are fundamentally incompatible.
The ultimate illustration of this system crash is the Thanksgiving hypothetical. Imagine your mother-in-law spends 3 days preparing this magnificent holiday feast. The family is gathered, the meal is spectacular, and as the night winds down, you stand up, you pull out your wallet, and you say, "Mom, that was an absolutely incredible meal. Here is $75 for your labor and materials."
Oh, man. The emotional devastation in that room would be absolute. You would likely be banned from future family gatherings for life.
But wait, under pure market norms, you are doing a noble thing. You are compensating a worker for highly skilled labor.
Right. Mathematically, it's very fair.
But by introducing currency, you haven't just paid for a meal. You have aggressively deleted the social norms of love, family, and community, and replaced them with the cold logic of a restaurant transaction. You insulted her intrinsic motivation.
And this isn't just some quirky rule for family dinners. Misunderstanding these operating systems leads to massive policy and corporate failures. Take the famous daycare experiment in Israel.
Oh, this one is mind-blowing.
It really is. So the daycare administrators had this chronic problem with parents showing up late to pick up their children, which of course forced the teachers to stay past closing time. Seeking a rational solution, economists advised them to introduce a market norm, a financial fine for any parent who arrived late.
Now, if a fine is designed to be a financial punishment, classical economics dictates that the penalized behavior should decrease, right? Like, that's basic logic. But the exact opposite happened. After the fine was introduced, the tardiness rate actually skyrocketed.
Because the administrators didn't realize they were swapping operating systems. See, before the fine, the parents were operating under social norms. When they were late, they felt a deep sense of guilt. They were violating a social contract with the teachers. But the moment the daycare introduced a fine, they slapped a price tag on the transgression. They moved the entire interaction into the market realm.
They priced the guilt. And it turns out guilt was a much stronger deterrent than a few dollars.
Exactly. The parents subconsciously recalculated the situation. They thought, oh, I am no longer inconveniencing a fellow community member. I am simply purchasing extra babysitting services, and I can afford this.
The moral weight of the action completely evaporated.
It just became a transaction. Yes. And the most dangerous part of this dynamic is its permanence. Because when the daycare realized the fine was a total disaster, they removed it. But the parents did not revert to being on time.
Because you can't unring the bell. Once you convert a relationship to a transaction, the social trust is burned. The parents now viewed it as, well, I'm not getting fined, and I don't owe you any social courtesy anymore, so I will arrive whenever I please.
The implications for anyone running a business or even managing personal relationships are staggering. You see modern corporations constantly invoking social norms to extract extra value from their employees.
Oh, all the time. We are a family here.
Yes, we are a family. We are a community on a mission. They want the late nights, the fierce loyalty, and the intrinsic motivation that comes from social norms. But the very moment revenue dips, they execute mass layoffs based on a purely mathematical market norm spreadsheet.
And the resulting employee betrayal isn't just about losing a job, it's a profound psychological violation, because you cannot demand the limitless devotion of the social operating system while treating people as disposable line items in the market operating system. It just breeds cynicism.
Exactly. You must consciously choose which domain you are operating in and accept the constraints of that choice. You can't have it both ways.
So we've established how external context like shifting between social and market environments radically alters our behavior. But our internal context is equally volatile. Our emotional and physical state can hijack our cognitive processing so completely that we effectively become different human beings. This is the phenomenon of the empathy gap.
The empathy gap is so powerful. It refers to the cognitive chasm between our cold, rational states and our hot, emotional states. And a cold state, like when we are rested, satiated, and calm, the prefrontal cortex is firmly in control. We are capable of magnificent long-term planning. We outline our retirement savings, we meticulously plan a healthy diet, we resolve to maintain strict ethical boundaries.
But we don't actually execute those plans in a cold state. We execute them in a hot state. Like, you plan your diet on a Sunday morning after a great night's sleep and a cup of coffee, but you break your diet on a Tuesday night when you are exhausted, stressed from work, and staring at a dessert menu.
And the tragedy of our neurology is that the cold state self is entirely incapable of simulating the neurochemical power of the hot state self. When adrenaline or cortisol or dopamine floods the system, the prefrontal cortex effectively goes offline.
The research explores this through a highly sensitive but honestly incredibly illuminating study on sexual arousal. Researchers had male college students answer this really rigorous questionnaire about their moral boundaries, their likelihood to engage in risky behaviors, and their capacity for self-control.
Right, and first they answered in a calm, neutral, cold state.
Exactly. And predictably, they mapped out these highly ethical, cautious, and respectful behavioral profiles, like perfect citizens.
But then the researchers induced a hot state. They had the exact same students answer the exact same questions while sexually aroused, and the behavioral profiles completely deteriorated. The students vastly underestimated how drastically their moral boundaries would erode and how willing they would be to engage in highly risky or even unethical actions.
It's like they became different people. And what's crucial to understand here for you listening is that this isn't just about sexual arousal. It applies uniformly to intense anger, profound hunger, or deep fear. When you are furious, your cold state promise to never raise your voice in an argument is instantly vaporized by a flood of cortisol. Your cognitive machinery literally changes.
It really does.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the most pervasive modern manifestation of the hot state, procrastination. We are constantly battling what economists call present bias.
Oh, present bias, the enemy of productivity everywhere.
Right. Present bias is the intense valuation of immediate gratification over delayed rewards. And to study how we manage this, Ariely conducted an experiment with his MIT students, dividing them into 3 classes with different term paper deadlines.
I love how he uses his own students as guinea pigs.
It's perfect, right? So Class A was given strict, externally mandated deadlines spread evenly throughout the semester. Class B was given total autonomy. They could submit all their papers on the very last day of class if they chose to. And Class C was allowed to set their own deadlines at the beginning of the semester, but those self-selected deadlines were binding.
Now, if the students were perfectly rational homo economicus, Class B would perform the best, right? Because total autonomy allows a perfectly rational actor to perfectly optimize their workflow around all their other obligations.
Mathematically, yes.
But because there were human beings battling present bias, Class B actually performed the worst. The hot state of, say, a fun weekend party constantly overpowered the cold state obligation of writing a paper, and it resulted in last-minute panic and terrible grades. Meanwhile, Class A, with the rigid forced deadlines, performed the best.
But the most revealing data came from Class C, the group that set their own deadlines. They fell right in the middle. They recognized their own weakness for procrastination, so they attempted to build structure, but they were overly optimistic about their future self-control. They didn't space the deadlines out rigorously enough.
It's like we have this deeply aspirational future self who writes checks that our impulsive present self absolutely refuses to cash. This just highlights the sheer futility of relying on willpower. Willpower is a cold state strategy deployed in a hot state battle. It is destined to fail.
It is.
So, to survive our own internal Jekyll and Hyde, we have to adopt a strategy from antiquity. The Ulysses Pact.
The Ulysses Pact is brilliant. In the myth, Ulysses knows his ship must sail past the sirens, whose song induces this irresistible hot state that forces sailors to steer their ships into the rocks. Crucially, his cold state self does not delude itself into thinking he can just use willpower to ignore the song.
He doesn't say, I'll just try really hard not to steer into the rocks.
No, not at all. Instead, he orders his men to tie him to the mast and plug their own ears with wax before they ever reach the danger zone.
He engineers a physical constraint. He outsmarts his future self by removing the mechanism of failure while he still has his rational faculties intact.
And this is the absolute essence of behavioral design. If you want to stop overspending, you don't just vow to be better with money. That's relying on willpower. Instead, you set up an automated transfer that moves 10% of your paycheck into an inaccessible account the moment it clears. You tie yourself to the mast.
Right. And if you want to wake up at 5 a.m. to exercise, you don't just set the alarm next to your bed. You put your alarm clock across the room, forcing your exhausted, hot state morning self to physically stand up to turn it off. You must design friction into your bad habits and remove friction from your good ones, entirely bypassing the need for willpower.
Because willpower will always fail you when you need it most.
Always. And, this internal struggle for control doesn't just dictate our daily habits. It fundamentally distorts how we relate to the physical world around us, particularly the things we own and the things we create. We are moving into this realm where ego and economics violently collide, which brings us to the endowment effect and the IKEA effect.
The endowment effect is fascinating because it demonstrates how the simple act of ownership radically alters our neurological perception of value. It is essentially the ultimate expression of loss aversion mapped onto physical property.
The definitive study on this involved Duke University basketball tickets. At Duke, acquiring tickets to major games requires surviving this grueling days-long campout just to enter a lottery. Like, it's intense.
Very intense.
And the researchers tracked down the students who won the lottery, so the new owners, and the students who lost the lottery. And they asked both groups a simple economic question. What is the monetary value of this ticket?
Now, the students who lost the lottery, the prospective buyers, they were willing to pay an average of $175, which for a college student, that is a substantial rational valuation for a highly desired entertainment experience.
Seems totally fair. But the students who won the lottery, the ones who had owned the ticket for merely a few hours, their average minimum selling price was $2,400.
It's a staggering cognitive distortion.
It's insane. It is the exact same piece of paper granting access to the exact same basketball game. The only variable that changed was ownership.
Right. And what happens is that the moment we take possession of an object, we integrate it into our sense of self. We begin to project our own anticipated memories and emotional attachments onto the item. And because we are deeply loss-averse, the psychological pain of parting with the object artificially inflates its market value in our minds. We falsely assume that a potential buyer will value our emotional attachment, which of course they don't.
They just want the ticket. And if mere ownership causes that level of distortion, the distortion becomes astronomical when we actually build the object ourselves. Enter the IKEA effect.
But I have to ask a structural question here because this always bugs me. Doesn't the IKEA effect contradict the very concept of the pain of paying or the cost of effort?
How so?
Well, assembling flat-pack furniture is universally frustrating. It causes arguments, you strip screws, your back hurts, you invariably have one wooden peg left over. Shouldn't the brain view that miserable expenditure of labor as a massive cognitive cost and therefore make us resent the finished object? Why does building a wonky shelf make me love it more? It's a brilliant question, and it cuts right to the heart of how human motivation fundamentally differs from mechanical efficiency. While classical economics views labor purely as a cost to be minimized, evolutionary psychology views labor, when it results in a completed task, as a deeply necessary signal of competence. We have an intrinsic biological need to manipulate our environment and prove our self-efficacy.
So the labor isn't a cost, it's an investment of ego.
Precisely. Labor leads to love. In the experiment, researchers had participants evaluate IKEA storage boxes. The participants who had to assemble the boxes themselves valued them significantly higher than those who were simply handed pre-assembled boxes. They actually perceived their own amateurish, flawed assembly as structurally superior.
That is hilarious.
Right. By enduring the frustration and completing the task, they entangled their identity with the cardboard. The cognitive dissonance resolves itself by convincing the brain, I suffered to build this, therefore it must be magnificent.
I am the conqueror of the flat-pack shelving unit.
Exactly. And for hobbies, like knitting or restoring old cars, this evolutionary quirk is beautiful. It provides deep life satisfaction.
But the professional implications are terrifying. This is exactly why an entrepreneur will pour millions of dollars and 5 years of their life into a failing software startup long after the market has clearly rejected it. The IKEA effect blinds them to objective reality. They cannot abandon the code because they wrote the code.
Yes, or consider a homeowner who spends months customizing a kitchen with highly idiosyncratic bright orange tiles and then prices their house 20% above market value because they assume buyers will pay a premium for their specific sweat equity.
Which they won't. So to survive the IKEA effect in a professional or financial setting, you really have to practice aggressive active detachment. You have to routinely run a mental simulation. If I did not already own this company or this stock or this house, what would I pay for it on the open market today? You have to conceptually sever the umbilical cord of your own ego.
Because if you let your ego run the math, you go bankrupt.
Absolutely. And speaking of the brain-distorting reality, we have to examine how our expectations don't just change our mood. They literally rewrite our sensory experience of the physical world. This is where behavioral economics intersects with neuroscience in a way that sounds almost like magic.
Oh, this is the top-down processing stuff. It's incredible. The classical view of human perception is bottom-up. Your taste buds detect chemicals in wine, send a signal to the brain, and the brain registers flavor. But modern neuroscience shows that the brain is largely a predictive engine. It generates expectations based on environmental context and then actively shapes the incoming sensory data to match those expectations.
The wine test is the perfect encapsulation of this. Researchers placed participants in an fMRI machine and gave them identical sips of the exact same Cabernet. But they changed the contextual data. When the subjects were told they were drinking a $100 bottle of wine, they didn't just politely say they liked it more. The fMRI scans showed that the pleasure centers in their prefrontal cortex literally fired with far more intensity than when they drank the exact same wine labeled with a $10 price tag.
Their taste buds were completely overridden by the price tag. The brain anticipated a premium experience, so it synthesized a premium experience.
It literally made it taste better. And it goes beyond luxury goods. The sources highlight this astonishing study on medical placebos that proves how our wallets act as pharmacists. Researchers administered identical placebo pills, sugar pills with 0 active ingredients, to participants who were then subjected to calibrated electrical shocks.
Ouch. But yeah, the environmental manipulation here was purely economic. One group was informed that the painkiller was a revolutionary new drug costing $2.50 per pill. The other group was told the pill was a discounted generic version costing only 10 cents.
Right, and they took the same sugar pill, they received the exact same electrical shocks, but the group that took the $2.50 placebo reported nearly twice as much pain relief as the group taking the 10-cent placebo.
Twice as much.
Yes. The expectation of efficacy, driven entirely by an arbitrary retail price, caused their brains to physically release natural endorphins and actively block the pain pathways in their nervous system.
It is a profound realization. To the human brain, a high price tag isn't just an economic cost. It is a biological signal of quality and power. Marketing is not just persuasion. It is literally neurochemical hacking.
So the placebo effect isn't just a medical phenomenon. Our wallets are prescribing our medicine based on price tags, which means as a consumer, your own biology is conspiring against your bank account. You have to actively fight the ingrained assumption that expensive equals better.
Right, which is really hard to do.
It is. The practical application here for you listening is to forcefully introduce blind trials into your own life. Remove the branding and the price tags, pour the store brand coffee and the artisanal roast into identical mugs and taste them blindly. You might be stunned to discover that without the neurochemical override of a high price tag, you actually prefer the cheaper option.
You have to strip away the contextual cues to find your true preferences. Now, if the brain is capable of synthesizing a fake reality to manage physical pain, it is hardly surprising that it employs similar cognitive acrobatics to manage our psychological pain. Specifically, the pain of acknowledging our own moral failings.
Oh, this brings us to the slippery, deeply uncomfortable architecture of human honesty. We love to divide the world into, good people and bad people. But the research on cheating reveals that our moral compass isn't a fixed true north. It's more like a highly elastic rubber band.
It really is. Ariely conducted extensive experiments using complex math matrices. Participants were given a sheet of math problems, a limited amount of time, and were paid a specific dollar amount for every problem they solved. Crucially, they were asked to grade their own papers and simply report their score to the researcher before dropping the original test into a paper shredder.
So they had the absolute certainty they would not be caught.
Exactly. Zero risk of getting caught. Now, if we follow the logic of Homo economicus, a rational agent maximizing utility, every single participant should have reported a perfect score to extract the maximum financial payout.
Right, take all the money.
But they didn't. Instead, the vast majority of people cheated just a little bit. If they solved 4 problems, they reported 6.
Just a little bump.
Just a little bump. This behavior is governed by the psychological theory of self-concept maintenance. See, we have 2 conflicting desires. We want the economic benefit of cheating, but we also have a deep-seated psychological need to view ourselves as honorable, trustworthy individuals. So we compromise.
We rationalize.
Yes, we rationalize a small infraction. We cheat just enough to get a slight edge, but not so much that it crosses an internal threshold requiring us to update our self-image from honest person to thief.
It is the exact same mechanism as diet rationalization. We treat our morality like a diet. You're on a strict diet, but you're out to dinner with a friend. Your friend orders a massive plate of French fries. Now, you would never order them yourself because that would violate your identity as a dieter, but you reach across the table and steal one fry. And you tell yourself, these calories don't count because I didn't order the plate. You create a narrative distance that allows you to indulge without fracturing your self-concept.
That concept of distance, mental and physical distance, is the most dangerous catalyst for dishonesty. The researchers proved this by changing the currency of the math test. Instead of paying the participants in cash for their reported scores, they paid them in plastic tokens, like poker chips. The students would take these chips and immediately walk across the room to exchange them for cash.
From an economic standpoint, the tokens are identical to cash. The transaction time is delayed by perhaps 30 seconds.
But psychologically, the introduction of that plastic token widened the mental distance between the action and the theft. And when paid in tokens, the rate of cheating absolutely exploded. People who would never dream of stealing a $5 bill straight from a researcher's wallet had almost no internal resistance to inflating their score for a plastic chip.
Because it's just a chip. This is where behavioral economics sounds a massive alarm for modern society. Because we are rapidly accelerating toward a completely cashless, highly abstracted economy. We operate via credit cards, Apple Pay, cryptocurrency, complex corporate stock options, digital derivatives. We are swimming in an ocean of tokens.
We really are.
And as the psychological distance between our actions and the physical reality of money expands, we are making it exponentially easier for ordinary, quote-unquote, good people to rationalize corporate fraud, expense report padding, and digital theft. When you aren't physically reaching into a cash register, your moral immune system just doesn't activate.
It is a dark trajectory. However, the exact same psychological elasticity that allows us to cheat also allows us to be easily course-corrected. The research demonstrates that honesty can be instantly restored by manipulating the environmental context.
Yes. I love this part. When the researchers asked the students to simply write down the 10 Commandments or sign a generic academic honor code immediately before taking the math test, the cheating completely vanished.
And this worked even if the students were atheists or couldn't remember more than 2 of the commandments. The actual content didn't matter. What mattered was the moral priming. By explicitly bringing the concept of ethics into their immediate working memory right at the point of decision, the researchers closed the mental distance. They eliminated the cognitive blind spot that allows rationalization to occur in the first place.
It proves that we aren't inherently evil. Our moral operating system just goes into sleep mode when the environment allows for ambiguity. If we want ethical behavior in our companies, in our schools, and ourselves, we cannot just rely on vague character traits. We have to actively design environments that insert moral friction directly at the point of action.
Which serves as the perfect synthesis of our entire analysis today. We have systematically deconstructed the myth of the rational human. We have seen how our valuation is easily hacked by decoys and the emotional gravity of the word free. We've explored the catastrophic system failure of mixing market and social norms. We've mapped the physiological hijack of the empathy gap, the ego traps of ownership, the sensory manipulation of placebos, and the contextual elasticity of our own morality.
It is a profoundly humbling mirror to hold up to ourselves. But as we said at the beginning, the objective here is not to surrender to our cognitive flaws. The objective is to use this detailed map of our irrationality to build what behavioral economists call cognitive prosthetics.
I love that term. Think of it like a physical vulnerability. If you have poor eyesight, you don't just squint harder and rely on willpower to read a book. You acknowledge the biological flaw and you wear glasses. A cognitive prosthetic is exactly the same thing. It's an external system designed to compensate for a predictable internal blind spot.
Right. We talked about the danger of tokens in a cashless society. The countermeasure is leveraging the pain of paying. When you hand over a crisp $50 bill to a cashier, your brain registers a visceral, immediate sense of loss. That neurological pain acts as a natural, highly effective brake on impulse buying. But a credit card is an abstraction engine. It separates the dopamine hit of acquiring the item from the pain of actually paying for it weeks later.
So if you are struggling with financial discipline, a highly effective cognitive prosthetic is to physically revert to cash for discretionary spending. You are intentionally reintroducing the neurological friction that modern banking has stripped away. You are forcing your brain to experience the transaction.
And this principle of designing friction scales massively to the societal level through the concept of nudging. If we know that human beings are overwhelmingly prone to inertia, present bias, and decision fatigue, it is honestly unethical for policymakers to force individuals to proactively navigate complex bureaucratic systems for their own good. We must design the default options to work in alignment with our psychology, not against it.
The quintessential example of the power of defaults is organ donation. In countries like the United States, where the DMV form requires you to actively check a box to opt in to being an organ donor, donation rates hover around a dismal 15 to 20%. Making that decision requires confronting your own mortality which induces a hot state of anxiety, causing the brain to just skip the box and succumb to the default path of least resistance.
But in European countries where the exact same form requires you to check a box to opt out of being an organ donor, the donation rates are consistently above 90%.
It's incredible.
The actual decision is identical. The biological reality is identical. But because human beings will almost always surrender to the default option, simply changing the architecture of the form saves countless thousands of lives. The default is the destiny.
The exact same logic applies to corporate retirement plans. When companies automatically enroll new employees in a 401k and force them to actively navigate HR paperwork to opt out, participation in long-term wealth generation skyrocket, we are outsmarting our own inertia.
And that is the ultimate takeaway for you listening to this right now. Stop relying on your exhausted, emotional, hot state willpower. Act as the architect of your own environment during your cold states. Throw away the junk food so you don't have to fight the craving at midnight. Automate your investments. Leave your credit cards at home when you go to the mall. Recognize that you are a deeply flawed, highly contextual, predictably irrational creature, and design your life to protect yourself from yourself.
And that leads to a final, vital provocation that we want to leave you with as you walk away from this deep dive. We have established that the environment dictates the behavior, and that whoever controls the defaults controls the human outcome.
The unseen hands.
Exactly. For most of human history, those defaults were set by happenstance or perhaps by slow-moving government bureaucracies. But fast forward to the present second. We have rapidly transitioned into an era where our environment is entirely digital, and the architecture of our choices is constructed by hyper-advanced artificial intelligence. These algorithms dictate our news consumption, our social interactions, our retail environments, and our entire worldview.
The algorithms are the new architects.
So the critical question you must continually ask yourself is this: what happens when these unseen digital systems understand your predictable irrationality vastly better than you understand it yourself? What happens when a machine learning model knows precisely which decoy option will trigger your comparison trap? When it knows the exact millisecond your cognitive fatigue will make you susceptible to an artificial anchor? When it can dynamically adjust the friction in your environment to exploit your loss aversion and present bias in real time? As you navigate this digital landscape, you must constantly look at the choices presented to you and ask, who is designing your defaults? And are they designing them to maximize your human flourishing, or are they designing them to maximize their own extraction?
Who is designing your defaults? Man, that is an incredibly powerful and frankly chilling lens through which to view the modern world. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Our entire mission today was to thoroughly muddy the waters of your own cognitive certainty and to equip you with the tools to spot those unseen hands guiding your life. So the next time you find yourself making a perfectly, flawlessly rational decision, take a breath, step back, and question it. We'll catch you on the next one.